Welcome back to Before You Go. We are a lifestyle portal for those seeking support in the areas of mental health, lifestyle, and wellness. Our goal is to help you reach social and emotional freedom. Today's segment is entitled Single in the City. This is part of our Breaking Pathology series. Now, before we get started, go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe. I would love to know some of your comments and your thoughts on this segment, as well as any future topics that you may like to see on this platform, on this channel. By the way, this segment is dedicated today to Ninan Veal in New York City. Ninan asks for this topic, and so hopefully this will be beneficial and useful for her as well as our other viewers. Again, we thank you for joining us. So let's go ahead and get started. In America, we have notions, stigmas, and stereotypes when it comes to the topic of the single black female. There was a time, though, in America when it was more plausible and when it was beneficial to be married. But fast forward to current day society when being married is less trendy and certainly not as necessary as it was, say, in the 1920s through the 1960s. There seems to be two schools of thought when you talk about single black females. There's one group of people who feel like single black women, we have fun, we're have full lives, we're exciting, we have big, fruitful social lives. And then there's the other group who says, oh my God, you must be miserable. You're missing out on love, life, and happiness as a single person, right? And so we're going to discuss those two things today. What I want to say before I start is that this video is definitely not a historical dive into why black women are single. I'm into the why of a lot of things, but this video is not about that. There's so much research and so many studies that have been done since the 1950s that talk about the why behind this topic. And just for those who are not aware, the conversation has always been, that there was a labor market stratification, that due to the declining manufacturing jobs and, say, the Rust Belt and some of the Midwestern areas, that disproportionately impacted black males. They talk about high mortality, morbidity, the high incarceration rates, the lack of good quality jobs for some African American men. So I do acknowledge all of that, but that's not what this video is about today. What it is about is putting things into context. And so in order for us to start, we are going to have to put ourselves into the big picture of America, right? And so our latest census data shows that there are 331 million Americans in this country, and African Americans make up just 13.4% of the population. But out of that huge number, that means 42 million people are considered to be black Americans. And just for clarification, I'm going to be using some data again from the US Census Bureau, from the Pew Research Center. They do a lot of data aggregation and analysis. And so Pew defines US black Americans as those that are single race, non-Hispanic blacks, those that are multiracial, and those that are black Hispanic. And so they lump all of those together and call those, US black population or American black population. That's just FYI. Now, some of the interesting things that came out of this data, it shows that African American and black women are 62% in what they call the unpartnered category. So 62% of us are unpartnered, meaning not just not married, but not in a romantic relationship with anyone. As opposed to African American men who say that there are just over half of them, 55%, are not in any sort of partner or romantic relationship. And again, this is from 2019. The data is going to be very interesting. Maybe next year when it shows that 2 year period where we had COVID and where everybody was shut in. So I don't know if that will impact this data at all. But also, what the Pew data shows is that marriages overall for all nationalities, it is actually down, and it has been declining since the 1990s. And so for whites, it's declined by 5%, for blacks 8%, and for Hispanic or Latinos 9%. And so again, that's not overwhelming, but there is a decline in marriages overall. Now, the question I have, and that I've had for some time, is being a single black female a choice, or is it a consequence? And you guys can answer that question in the comments below. I kind of teeter back and forth, right? Sometimes I think it's a choice, and sometimes I actually think it's a natural consequence, right? Remember, consequences can be good or bad, and there are natural consequences to things. Like maybe being single is a natural consequence to having higher education, having more money, having, whatever. So not needing to be married for some of the reasons that people were married in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So again, that is food for thought. Will provide rich conversation at some point. Is this a consequence or is this a choice? But one thing we know for sure is that the consequence of being a single black female with children, there are tons of consequences for that and tons of implications for that. So I just want to go over some of that information. 64% of our children in single parent households are being led by African American women. 52% by American Indians, 42% by Hispanic and Latino, and just 24% by white. And so we know that the implications of being raised in a single parent family, you have less disposable income, parents have less time, less quality time to spend with their kids. And I did a previous video in which we talked about being in survival mode, right? Being in that mode of operation where you're just, getting your basic needs met. You're just getting food. You just have shelter. You barely have lights and gas, so on and so forth. So being in that constant survival mode definitely has an effect on your mental stability, and it causes all types of generational issues and pathologies down the road. I'm sure we all can speak to that. But let's get into some of the benefits of being married. Again, even though marriage is on the decline, I just want people to know that there are some natural benefits, and these benefits are written into the law. And I don't know if everybody knows about these. There's one on here that I was not aware of, and I'll talk about in a second. But if you are officially and legally married, the federal law states that you have access to your partner's Social Security benefits. It says that you have the right to inherit property even if your spouse does not have a will. And there are some real estate laws and things that go around that, but that's a general statement. There's also tax breaks on like estate tax and inheritance tax. You're exempt from penalties like on your IRAs. If you try to take that money out, withdraw that, you have to pay fees. There's income tax breaks. Everybody knows that if you are married with children, you typically will get a refund as opposed to being single and sometimes having to pay money, But this is the one I was unaware of. There is a federal law that states that married people can give each other $14,000 a year without paying taxes. So that means a man can give his wife $14,000. A wife can give her husband $14,000. And together they can give twice that. So they can give $28,000 to a recipient of their choice, and the recipient doesn't have to pay taxes. So just imagine doing this for 20 or 30 years. You're going to have a really nice nest egg, either for retirement or for, to pass on to your children. And so that's building that generational wealth a little bit at a time. And so that's really one of those really significant benefits of being married. And of course, there are all the other benefits, such as companionship, having somebody to grow old with, having somebody to kind of live your life and your dreams with, right? And so when people feel like they're missing out on something, that typically is what they're talking about. It's not necessarily those benefits that I just mentioned. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and she's kind of in like a mid career sort of transition, and we were talking about purpose. I think the older you get, you start to kind of contemplate your purpose, your purpose in all entities of life, whether it's work, family, church, whatever, right? And so when I was in eighth grade, for my eighth grade graduation, I wrote a poem called Fulfillment in Life. And I can't believe I had the forethought to think about, what I would want in terms of my purpose, what was going to be my purpose as I grew into adulthood. But it still is fulfillment. And so I found this nice study. I typically do not use studies this small, but this is kind of an interesting study. It was done by a lady at Wayne State University, Professor Jessica Mormon, and her study is called Socializing Singlehood. It talks about Black women's single lives, right? It was featured in Psychology of Women Quarterly. But it kind of highlights some of those benefits of being single, just like I talked about the benefits a few seconds ago of being married. This one talks about the benefits of being single. And what this study did, she talked to 24 Black women from Detroit, and they were ages 25 to 46. Most of them had never been married before. A couple were divorced, and one was even widowed. But they all identified themselves as heterosexual. They were all born as females, and none of them were at the time of the study, cohabitating or involved in any sort of romantic relationship. And so here's what she found. She found that single women have a freedom and a security to enjoy life at their own pace and for their own reasons. She found that there were not many problems with money management or having to deal with people lying about money, no problems with emotional inconsistency from a partner. So those were the top three things. And I do want to clarify that she wasn't saying that having a romantic partner poses those risks. She was saying that by living a single life that you are safe from those risks, if that makes sense. Some of the other benefits, they talked about being able to quote unquote sidestep gender responsibilities that would typically eat up your time, your money, and your autonomy. They talked about having more time for emotional growth, right? That's the foundation of what we talk about here at Before You Go, is being able to get to that state of emotional freedom through self-discovery. They talked about spiritual growth, community involvement, so on and so forth. And of course, some of the obvious benefits of being a single Black female, you have more time to pursue educational goals. You definitely have more time to travel, go to places that you've never been before. They talked about having more time for work and entrepreneurship and having the ability to plan financially to do things like own property. And so, again, those are some of the highlights of being a single Black female in America. Now, we always talk about the mental health connection, right? And of course, there is a mental health connection here, especially when we talk about those stigmas, those notions, and those stereotypes. And there's this notion that if you're single, that you must be lonely. And I just kind of want to dispel that, because loneliness doesn't mean that you are lacking a romantic relationship. Loneliness actually means that you lack social connectedness, right? The lack of quality relationships, the lack of authentic relationships, authentic, intentional relationships. And so you can be in a relationship with someone and not have those things, right? And so you can be lonely in a relationship. You can be lonely in a room of 1,000 people because you lack that social connectedness. So that is very key if you are having those feelings of loneliness. And I just want to do a kind of checks and balances here. If you are having feelings like that, you just totally lack companionship, you feel left out of situations and events, you feel like you're not in tune with the people around you. You don't feel as outgoing and friendly as normal. You don't feel like you have anybody you can turn to. Those are some warning signs, okay? And so those are feelings of loneliness. Those are some signs and symptoms that you need to see somebody about. And so I've said time and time again, get somebody in your phone, put a number in there, of a therapist, of a psychiatrist or psychologist that you can call on, make some appointments, do some check-ins, but don't get to the point where you just feel like you're at the point of no return. Okay. So there's somebody who can help you work out those problems. But again, loneliness is that lack of social connectedness. Now, when we talk about the stigma, right? The stigma of the single black female, people automatically assume that there's something wrong with you, that you in some way must be dysfunctional. And again, that is simply a stigma. It is not true. And I just want to go back a little bit in history, do a little history lesson, a 5-second history lesson, if you will. Back in the 1800s, all the way, to the mid 1900s, there has been a campaign against Black women in the form of propaganda. You see this caricature here. It started out like with comic strips, right? And cartoons and things like that, where they had the sassy mammy and the sapphire. And it usually was a woman that looks like this here. She's big, she's sexy, in terms of the way she's dressed. She's voluptuous, she's belligerent, she has a big mouth, she berates people, especially Black men. And that kind of developed into the Aunt Esther character. And now today, it's not even a caricature. Now it's in reality TV, right? So they've gone from letting you know, hey, this is a caricature, to now showing you people who could look like you, who could be you in this so-called realistic environment called reality TV, and it's plastered all over social media, all over cable TV, regular, networks. And so this is the modern day when you see these people on social media and on these reality shows. They're the modern day sapphires and mammies, right? And so they used to call them sassy mammies, and you still hear that word sassy, but now we interchange it with spicy, right? You hear people say, oh, I'm just spicy. That just means you're sassy mammy, right? You're a sapphire. But I just wanted to give that little history lesson there. So just be careful, what we promote and what we support in terms of these images. Anyway, getting back to the stigma, this notion that there must be something wrong with you, that you, again, are in some way dysfunctional. You can combat that. You can dispel that. And one of the ways you can do that is just to ignore people's expectations. If somebody has an expectation of you that doesn't match your own purpose, what it takes to fulfill your purpose, you have the right to ignore those expectations. And really, you have a right to do it without explanation. The other thing you can do is to know that being a part of a couple doesn't mean happiness, right? We all know couples that have been together, maybe married for many, many years, and they are miserable. So that doesn't equate to happiness. The other thing we need to know is that, we can enhance ourselves and our relationships by having positive friend groups and having positive social circles. And again, that deals with having those intentional relationships, knowing how to build and create and maintain those. And lastly, I want to tell you that being single is not abnormal, right? We just looked at a ton of statistics, and you see that marriages are not only on the decline, but in terms of our population, being single is not abnormal. Now, we've talked about these problems. Let's talk about solutions. And so, we like to talk about breaking the pathologies. So let's get into that. Now, I know people are often faced, and I've been faced with them in the past. You go somewhere, you go to a family event, you go to a big party, you haven't seen people in a while, and what's the question? Are you still single? Are you dating anybody? Why are you still single? Right? Those questions. And so you're going to get those questions because people really don't understand their place. But here's the way to combat that. So One way to combat that is to say, I don't own your anxiety. Just repeat that to yourself over and over. I do not own other people's anxiety. If something in my life is making somebody more anxious than I am, there's a problem, right? That there's a red flag. So you don't need to own other people's anxiety. One thing that I've done in the past, when people come at you with that question, and it really is quite annoying, I let people know right then and there, I am in a happy place. I'm happy with my life. If I find someone who is compatible with me and we, are each other's yin and yang, if you will, I will be really, really ecstatic. But until then, I'm very pleased with the state of my current life, right? And I usually change it, to them. I ask them a question, are you happy with your life right now? What are you doing to keep yourself busy? Those sort of things, right? So I'm not going to own their anxiety about me and my life. The other thing you can do is not feel guilty, right? So in life, we have intended consequences and we have unintended consequences. And just knowing that should make you feel a little less guilty, okay? You have no reason to feel guilty for where you are in your current state of affairs, okay? If there's something that you want to change, you need to get on the road. As I always say to emotional freedom, you need to start changing it. But there's nothing for you to feel guilty about right now. The third thing I want to talk about is self love, right? Such a simple concept, but also such a complex process, okay? You have to do the work, as we've said many, many times before. So, working on that self love is key. Realize that nobody's going to be able to love you if you don't love yourself. You won't even be able to recognize when that person is in front of your face if you don't love yourself, because you're not going to think that you're worthy of that type of love and that type of companionship. So that's just something to keep in mind. And there was a song, it was called Get Up, Get Out, and Get Something. I don't know who sang it, or maybe that was a verse, but I just remember that phrase. And that kind of goes with self love, right? Again, if you look in the mirror, you don't like what you see, change it. If are a person who has no hobbies, no dreams, get some. Can you effectively communicate your wants and needs to the person if you did have them? So if not, learn good two-way communication. And lastly, do you appreciate yourself? If you don't appreciate yourself, like I said before, nobody else is going to appreciate you. So that kind of wraps up everything I wanted to say for this segment. But for those people who want some tangible advice, right? I want to know where to go, is what most people say. Here's a map, again from 2019, of where we as African Americans, those millions and millions of people I started out talking about, we are primarily in the South, right? 50%, 56% of us, excuse me, are in the South. And so maybe you want to take a vacation. If you don't live in Texas, Florida, DMV, Alabama, those places, hey, get a girls trip, take a trip down there, start looking around. But yeah, this is the breakdown of where we are in this great country. And so we are saturated in the South still. And so again, that wraps it up. I want to thank you guys for joining us for this segment. We could have many, many more of these segments. This is a very, very interesting topic, and depending on people's viewpoints, it can go left, right, or somewhere in between. But again, I appreciate you guys for watching. I hope that some of this information helps you with your decision-making process, and I also hope that it helps you on your journey to emotional freedom. Don't forget, as always, to check out our other videos, and you can also head over to our website. The website is Mixed Greens for the Soul. Again, Mixed Greens for the Soul. And you can find this content and lots more over there. And the last thing I want to tell you guys is we are so excited. We have our first book coming out. That's going to be coming out to you really, really soon. So stay tuned to this channel and again to that website to find out where you're going to be able to purchase it. But I do want to give you a little teaser, when we're talking about breaking these pathologies, this book is going to help you start to create and establish and monitor some healthy habits to introduce to your families and to pass those on, from generation to generation. So again, we do a lot of work here, in these small snippets, but it's nice to be able to put your hand on something that you can refer back to. And again, that you can share, with your children, with maybe even older people if they're willing to do that work. But we have to do something to change this trajectory that we're on. And my gift, if you will, is to put everything in writing and put it into this big book format. And so please look forward to more to come about that. But we're really excited about that opportunity. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry I kind of rushed through this one, but it is a really, really important topic, really interesting topic. And again, let's dispel some of those myths out there. Be proud of whatever state you are in, and find your purpose. Okay. So until we meet again, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys later.